You don't get to decide that, she said, her voice breaking as she gripped his hand tighter. The heart monitor screamed. His eyes found hers. And for the first time in 60 years, Elliot Vance looked afraid of losing something that actually mattered. If you've ever stayed for someone when every voice told you to walk away, this story is for you. Don't leave yet. The light in the basement laundry room of St. Miriam's Hospital flickered every 11 seconds. Simone Williams had counted. 11 seconds of full brightness, then a half second of darkness, then back again. A rhythm she'd memorized over 2 years of night shifts folding linens that smelled like bleach and other people's suffering. She was 29 years old. Her hands were raw. Her back ached in a way that no amount of stretching could fix. A deep, like structural ache built from years of bending over. Over beds, over sinks, over the small kitchen table in her aunt's apartment where she used to do homework by candlelight when the electricity went out. Simone pulled another sheet from the dryer, folded it with the precision of someone who'd learned that small, careful acts were the only way to survive a world that didn't slow down for anyone. Tonight was supposed to be her last shift before a rare 2 days off. But the schedule board had already been changed when she arrived. Someone called out. Someone always called out. And Simone, reliable, quiet, never say no Simone, was the name that kept appearing in the gap. She finished the laundry cart and wheeled it toward the elevator, her green scrubs wrinkled at the sleeves, and her dark hair wrapped tight against her head in a scarf she tied fresh every shift. The hospital at 2 a.m. was a different world. Quieter. Lonelier. The daytime bustle, the visitors, the crying children, the anxious families clutching coffee cups, all of it gone. What remained was the hum of machines, the occasional squeak of shoes on linoleum floors, and the weight of everyone who was dying, slowly or quickly, behind closed doors. Simone rode the elevator to the 4th floor. She was supposed to deliver fresh linens to rooms 412 through 420, the cardiac ward. Straightforward, mechanical. The kind of task her body could do while her mind drifted to the nursing exam she still hadn't finished studying for. The $23,400 in debt that sat in her chest like a stone. The way her Aunt Blessing had called last week and asked gently, if Simone was eating enough. She was. Barely. But she was. Room 412. Fresh sheets on the bed while the patient slept. Room 413. Same. Room 414. The door was open, the light off, and she stepped inside quietly, setting the folded linens on the chair by the door. That's when she noticed the room number on the chart hanging outside the next door she'd just passed. She'd skipped 415, gone straight to 416 without realizing it. Simone backed up, checked the number again. 415. The door was closed but not latched. She pushed it open gently, expecting another sleeping patient, another quiet task completed and forgotten. The room stopped her. Not because of what was in it, because of what was missing. No television playing, no get-well cards taped to the wall in colorful clusters. No flowers, not a single one, on the windowsill. No photographs, and no worn paperback on the bedside table. No jacket draped over the visitor's chair. The visitor's chair itself had been pushed into the corner, untouched, as though no one had ever thought to sit in it. The man in the bed was awake. He was watching her stand in his doorway with an expression that wasn't surprise. It was something older than surprise. Something closer to the look a person gives when they've learned, over many years, that being seen is not the same as being noticed. He was thin. Not frail, not yet, but hollowed in a way Simone recognized immediately. She'd seen it 100 times in these halls. The body eating itself because the thing keeping it alive was failing. His skin held a faint yellowish undertone. His hair, once dark, had gone silver at the temples and white everywhere else. His hands rested on the white blanket. Long-fingered, still, But his eyes were sharp, a pale, almost colorless blue. The kind of blue that existed in winter skies just before dawn, when the world was deciding whether to wake up or stay dark. Those eyes found hers and held. Simone's instinct, the nurse's instinct, the survival instinct, the instinct of someone who had learned to move through the world taking up as little space as possible, said, "Leave. You're in the wrong room. Put the linens down, close the door, find 415 on your route and move on." But something in the way he looked at her, not with need, not with pain, but with a quiet, almost resigned curiosity, as though she were the first interesting thing that had happened to him in a very long time, made her pause. "Sorry," she said, her voice low. "Wrong room. I didn't mean to." "It's fine." His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in days. Maybe it hadn't. "You're the first person who's actually looked at me since I got here." Simone blinked. The man didn't move, didn't reach for a call button, didn't shift uncomfortably. He simply stated it, the way someone states the weather. A fact. Unremarkable to him, even if it should have been devastating. "The nurses come in," he continued, his gaze drifting briefly to the machines beside him. The heart monitor, the IV drip, the quiet mechanical chorus that kept him tethered to life. They check the readings, adjust the drip, write something on the chart. Then they leave. Very efficient, very professional. A pause. No one talks. Simone set the linens down on the edge of the chair, the untouched chair, and stood very still. She should leave. This wasn't her patient. This wasn't her job. She was an aide, not a counselor. She had 12 more rooms to service before her shift ended, and the clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m., and her feet ached so badly she could feel the bones grinding inside her shoes. But the room was so empty. And the man in the bed looked so perfectly, completely alone that it was almost a physical thing. A coldness in the air, a weight, like the room itself had absorbed years of silence and was radiating it back. "I'm Simone," she said. She didn't know why she said it. The words came out before she could stop them. The man studied her face for a long moment. Then something at the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The memory of one, maybe? The shape a smile would take if it remembered how. "Elliot," he said. "Elliot Vance. And I'm dying." He said it the way someone might say, "I'm tired," or "I'm late." Plainly, without drama. "So I suppose we're both being honest tonight." Simone felt something shift in her chest. Not pity, exactly. Something sharper. Something that recognized itself in him. "How long?" she asked. Then, immediately, "Sorry, nurse brain, you don't have to." 4 to 6 months. He said it without flinching. "End-stage liver failure. Cirrhosis. They moved me out of the ICU last week because there's nothing left to do except keep me comfortable until it's over." The heart monitor beeped its slow, mechanical rhythm. Simone looked at the empty windowsill, the dusty visitor's chair, the bare walls where cards and photos should have been, where proof that someone existed beyond these four walls should have been. "Is there anyone?" she asked quietly. "Family? A friend you'd want me to call?" Elliot's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still, like a lake freezing over, the surface going smooth and unreadable in a single moment. "No," he said. "There's no one." 2 words, spoken without self-pity, without bitterness, without any of the colors Simone had learned to associate with loneliness. Just fact, just truth. The kind of truth that had been repeated so many times it had worn itself smooth, like a stone in a riverbed. Simone stood in that room for another 30 seconds. The linens waited on the chair. The clock ticked. Somewhere down the hall, A door opened and closed. Then she picked up the linens, set them neatly at the foot of his bed, not because it was her job, but because it was something, and pulled the visitor's chair out of the corner. She set it beside his bed, angled so that if someone wanted to sit, they could. There, she said, just in case. Elliot looked at the chair, then at her. Thank you, Simone, he said. She nodded once and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. In the hallway, she stopped, pressed her back against the cool wall and breathed. Her chest felt tight, not from exhaustion, though she was exhausted, from something else, something she couldn't name yet. She finished her rounds, delivered the linens, clocked out at 6:03 a.m., drove home through streets that were just beginning to lighten at the edges, the sky going from black to deep purple to the first thin line of gold. She thought about Elliot Vance the entire drive home, and not about his money. She didn't know yet that he had any. Not about his illness. She'd seen 100 dying patients and had long since learned to protect herself from the weight of it. She thought about his eyes, about the way he'd said there's no one as though it were the most natural sentence in the world, about the chair. She'd moved it for him, not because someone told her to, not because it was protocol, because no one else had. Simone lay in bed that morning, still in her scrubs, and stared at the ceiling of her small room. The morning light crept through the thin curtain. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed. One of the neighbors kept chickens, and Simone had never complained, because the sound reminded her of mornings at her grandmother's house, before everything got complicated. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow. Today. And technically, was her day off. But she already knew she was going back. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, that quiet ache of wondering if someone would ever truly see you, stay. The next part is where everything changes. Simone told herself it was curiosity. She told herself that on the drive back to St. Miriam's the next afternoon, her day off, wasted on something she couldn't explain. She'd bought 2 coffees from the corner shop near her apartment. Black, because she didn't know how he took it. She carried them in a cardboard holder, feeling slightly ridiculous, like she was visiting a friend and not a man she'd spoken to for 4 minutes. Room 415. The door was closed. She almost turned around. Then she knocked. Come in. His voice was stronger today. Curious. Simone pushed the door open and held up the coffees like a peace offering. I wasn't sure if you were allowed, but I figured, worst case, the nurses confiscate it and I drink both. Elliot stared at her. Not with surprise, exactly. With something closer to disbelief. The kind of look a man gives when he's been expecting silence and someone walks in with a voice. You came back, he said. 2 words. But the way he said them, quiet, almost careful, like he was testing whether they were real, made something in Simone's chest tighten. I said I would. She hadn't, not out loud. But something in the way she'd left last night had been a promise, and they both knew it. She handed him the coffee. Their fingers touched, just barely, just for a second, and neither of them moved away quickly. They sat in silence for a while, sipping. The kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The kind that existed between 2 people who were both used to being alone and had forgotten that quiet didn't always have to feel empty. Tell me something, Elliot said finally, his eyes on the window where pale afternoon light was cutting through the blinds in thin gold lines. Something real, not nurse talk, not polite talk. Something you wouldn't normally say out loud. Simone looked at him. His face was open, not performing vulnerability, just offering it. Like he was saying, I have nothing left to hide. Neither do you. She thought for a long moment. I'm terrified, she said, that I'm going to spend my whole life taking care of other people, and no one is ever going to ask me if I'm okay. The words came out before she could stop them. Honest. Raw. The kind of thing she'd never said to anyone. Not her Aunt Blessing, not her coworkers, not the mirror in her small bathroom at 5 a.m., when the exhaustion made her cry and she wiped it away before anyone could see. Elliot turned to look at her. His pale blue eyes held hers. Steady, unhurried, full of something that looked like recognition. "Someone is asking," he said softly. "Right now, I'm asking." The heart monitor beeped. Simone felt her eyes burn, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't look away. Simone stopped visiting for 3 days. She told herself it was work. Double shifts. Overtime she couldn't afford to say no to. The truth, the real truth she wouldn't look at directly, was that something had cracked open in that room, and she was afraid of how wide it would go. And she'd said things to Elliot Vance she'd never said to anyone. And he'd seen her. Not the version of herself she showed the world. The quiet one, the reliable one, the one who never complained. But the real one. The scared one. The one who cried in the bathroom at 5 a.m. That terrified her more than anything. On the 4th day, her coworker Janet stopped her in the break room. "You've been going to 415, Janet said. Not a question. Elliot Vance. Simone went still. "How do you know that?" Janet leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Everyone knows, Simone. The nurses talk. You're not his aide. You're not assigned to him. And you've been bringing him coffee." Janet's voice wasn't cruel. It was cautious, protective even. "He's a dying man with more money than God. You need to be careful about what people think." The words landed like cold water. What people think. Simone had spent her entire life worrying about what people thought. Whether she was enough, whether she was taking up too much space, whether anyone noticed her at all. And now, the one time someone had actually seen her, the world was telling her to step back. She went home that night and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. The same hands that had pulled that visitor's chair out of the corner. The same hands that had handed him a coffee and watched his fingers tremble around the cup. She thought about leaving him alone again. The thought made her feel sick. The next morning, Simone walked back into room 415. Elliot was sitting up, watching the door like he'd been watching it for days. When he saw her, something in his face shifted. Relief and something sharper, something that looked almost like anger. "Where did you go?" he asked. His voice was flat, controlled, but his hands, gripping the edge of the bed, told a different story. "I needed to think," Simone said. "About what?" She met his eyes, didn't flinch. "About whether I'm allowed to care about you." The room went quiet. The heart monitor filled the silence. Steady, patient, indifferent to the two people breaking open inside it. Elliot held her gaze for a long time. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. "And?" he asked. Simone pulled the chair close to his bed, the same chair, the one she'd moved that first night, and sat down. "I'm here, aren't I?" Something moved across Elliot's face. Not a smile, not yet, but the space where a smile lived. Warm, cracked open, terrified and grateful all at once. He reached out his hand. Simone took it. It was a Tuesday when Elliot told her the truth. Not about his illness, not about his money, about the thing underneath all of it, the wound he'd been carrying for 30 years like a stone sewn into his chest. Simone had brought him soup that day. Not hospital soup. Real soup. Her Aunt Blessing's recipe, thick and warm, in a thermos she'd wrapped in a cloth napkin. A small thing, but Elliot looked at it like she'd handed him something sacred. "My daughter," he said without warning. His voice was quiet, careful, like he was handling something fragile. "Her name is Claire," She's 32. I haven't spoken to her in 8 years. Simone didn't interrupt. She just held his hand, tighter this time, and waited. I was not a good father. He said it plainly. I had no excuses, no softening. I was present in the house. I paid for everything, but I was never there. Not really. Not the way a child needs. His jaw tightened. Claire stopped calling after her mother left. I told myself it was her choice. Told myself she'd come around. He paused. The heart monitor beeped its quiet rhythm. She didn't, and I didn't try either, because trying meant admitting I had failed, and I wasn't ready to feel that. Simone was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she told him hers. My mother left when I was 6, she said. Her voice was steady, the kind of steady that comes from telling yourself the story so many times it no longer has sharp edges. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. One morning she was there. The next morning she wasn't. Elliot turned to look at her. His eyes, those pale, winter sky eyes, held something raw, something that understood. My grandmother raised me after that. She was 53, tired, but she never once made me feel like I was a burden. Simone's voice wavered, just barely, on the word burden. She used to say, the people who leave don't define you. The people who stay do. The room was very still. Is that why you stay? Elliot asked. Softly, like the question itself was fragile. Simone looked at him. Really looked, past the illness and the age and the empty room that had surrounded him for months. She looked at the man underneath all of it. The one who was afraid. The one who had spent a lifetime running from exactly this kind of moment. I stay, she said, because you see me, and no one has ever done that before. Elliot's hand tightened around hers, and neither of them spoke for a while after that. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full, heavy with everything they'd just handed each other and the fragile, terrifying trust that came with it. Outside, the sun was setting. Gold light crept across the floor of room 415, slow and warm, like the world was giving them this one quiet moment before everything changed. The call came on a Friday morning. Simone was halfway through her shift when Dr. Reyes pulled her aside in the hallway. His face told her everything before his mouth did. Elliot had an episode last night, he said quietly. His liver function dropped sharply. We stabilized him, but... He paused, chose his words carefully. We're looking at days now, maybe a week, not months. The hallway tilted, but Simone didn't remember walking to room 415. She didn't remember pushing open the door. She remembered only the sound of the heart monitor, faster now, more urgent, and the sight of Elliot in the bed, smaller than she'd ever seen him, his skin pale and waxy under the harsh light. But his eyes, still sharp, still that pale winter sky blue, still watching the door. You heard, he said. Not a question. Simone closed the door behind her, walked to the chair, the same chair, always the same chair, and sat down. She took his hand. It was cold. I heard, she said. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that didn't need filling, the kind that existed between two people who had already said everything that mattered and were now simply being together in whatever time was left. Then Elliot spoke. I don't want to die alone. His voice didn't shake. It was steady, the way it had been that first night when he'd told her he was dying like it was the weather. But underneath the steadiness, Simone heard something she'd never heard from him before. Fear. You're not alone, she said. I'm here. That's not what I mean. He turned to look at her. His eyes, his eyes, held something enormous, something he was terrified to say. Simone, I want you to know, when this is over, that what happened in this room was real. That you weren't just someone who felt sorry for me. That this, he squeezed her hand, weakly but deliberately, was the most real thing that ever happened to me. Simone's throat closed. It was, she whispered. It is. Elliot was quiet for a moment. Then he said it. Marry me. The heart monitor beeped. Oh, Simone blinked. What? Marry me. He said it plainly. No grand gesture, no bending on one knee. He couldn't, even if he wanted to. Just his eyes on hers, open and honest and completely, terrifyingly bare. Not for money, not for the world. For me. So that when I go as someone's husband. Someone who was loved. Someone who chose and was chosen. Simone's hands were shaking. Elliot, you don't have to. His voice softened. I know what this looks like. I know what people will say. A dying man. A woman half his age. They'll say it's manipulation. They'll say it's pity. They'll say all kinds of things. He paused. But you and I know the truth. And the truth is, I have never loved anyone the way I love you. Not my wife. Not anyone. You walked into the wrong room. And it was the first right thing that ever happened to me. Simone was crying now. She couldn't stop it. Tears running down her face, her hands trembling around his, her chest so full of something enormous that it physically hurt. She thought about her grandmother, about the kitchen table and the Sunday dinners, and the way Ruth used to say, "The people who leave don't define you. The people who stay do." She thought about the chair, the first night, the way she'd pulled it out of the corner because no one else had. She thought about every choice she'd made since that night. Every time she came back, every time the world told her to stop, every time she stayed anyway. Yes, she said. Elliot's breath caught. Yes? Yes. She laughed through the tears, a broken, beautiful sound. Yes. I'll marry you. Something happened to his face in that moment. Something Simone would carry with her for the rest of her life. Every wall he had ever built, every layer of resignation and loneliness and learned helplessness, crumbled. All at once, like a house of cards in the wind. And underneath it all was just a man, terrified, grateful, loved. The wedding was 3 days later. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't planned. The hospital chaplain officiated it in the small chapel on the second floor. A quiet room with wooden pews and soft light coming through stained glass windows that cast colored shadows on the floor. Simone wore a simple white dress she'd bought that morning from a shop near the hospital. Nothing expensive, nothing elaborate. Just clean lines and soft fabric, and the way it made her feel for the first time in her life, I'd like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Elliot wore the blue shirt Simone had brought him. The nicest thing she could find on short notice. He sat in a wheelchair at the altar, thin and pale and unable to stand. But his eyes, those pale, winter sky eyes, were the brightest Simone had ever seen them. There were only a handful of people there. Aunt Blessing, who had driven 3 hours and cried the moment she walked in. Janet from the hospital, who had set aside her earlier warnings and helped Simone find the dress. Dr. Reyes, who stood quietly at the back with his hands folded, watching with something that looked like wonder. And the chaplain, a soft-spoken woman named Pastor Linda, who had heard the story from the nurses and had agreed without hesitation. "We are gathered here," Pastor Linda began, but her voice warm and unhurried. "Not because this love is ordinary, but because it isn't. This is a love that found each other in the most unlikely place. A wrong room, a chance encounter, and a choice, made again and again, to stay." Simone and Elliot looked at each other. The vows were simple. Neither of them had prepared anything. They hadn't had time. But when Pastor Linda asked if they had anything to say to each other, Elliot spoke first. "I spent 60 years building a life," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "And none of it mattered until you walked through that door. You are the only thing I ever built that was worth keeping." Simone couldn't speak for a moment. She pressed her lips together, breathed through the tears, and found her voice. "I spent my whole life being invisible," she said. "You made me seen. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. And I choose you. Today, tomorrow, for as long as I have." Pastor Linda smiled. "Then by the power vested in me," she said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Elliot couldn't kiss her, not really. He was too weak to lean forward. So Simone leaned down instead, gently, carefully, and pressed her lips to his. Soft, warm, a promise. The small chapel was quiet for a moment after. Then Aunt Blessing clapped, and Janet laughed, and Dr. Reyes nodded. Once, slowly, like something had just been confirmed that he'd been hoping was true. Elliot Vance lived for 11 more days after the wedding. Simone was with him every single one of them. Some days were good. They sat together in room 415, the same room, the same chair, the same quiet, and talked about nothing and everything. Not about the weather outside the window, about the taste of the coffee she brought him each morning, about the way the sunlight hit the floor at 4 p.m. in a stripe of gold that made the whole room feel warm. Some days were hard. The pain was worse. The machines beeped louder. Simone held his hand and didn't let go, even when the nurses asked her to step out. She didn't step out. She was his wife now. She was allowed to stay. On the last morning, Elliot woke up and looked at her. Really looked, the way he had that very first night, like she was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to him. "Thank you," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes were clear, peaceful. The fear that had been there for months, was gone. "For what?" Simone asked, holding his hand against her cheek. "For walking into the wrong room." She smiled through the tears. "Always," she said. Elliot closed his eyes. His hand went still in hers. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Quietly. The way he had lived, in the end. Quietly. Surrounded by warmth. Surrounded by someone who stayed. The heart monitor flatlined. Simone sat with him for a long time after, holding his hand. Not crying. Not yet. Just breathing. Just being present in the silence of a room that was no longer empty. 6 months later, Simone Vance, now, though she still thought of herself by both names, stood in the small backyard of her new apartment. The one Elliot's estate had helped her find. Nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom near Aunt Blessing's house with a small patch of earth behind it that caught the morning sun. She was planting roses. It had been Elliot's idea. One of the last things they'd talked about. "Plant something," he'd said. "Something that grows after you." So she did. She knelt in the dirt, pressed the roots into the soil, and covered them with her hands. The earth was cool and dark and alive beneath her fingers. Somewhere behind her, Aunt Blessing was setting up a table for lunch. The same recipe, the same cloth napkin, the same quiet love that had kept Simone standing her whole life. Somewhere inside, on the kitchen counter, sat a letter from Elliot's lawyer. The estate had been settled. Elliot had left most of his fortune to charity, hospitals, nursing scholarships, programs for people drowning in medical debt. But he'd left Simone something too. Enough to finish her nursing degree. Enough to build the life she'd always wanted. Enough to stay. Simone patted the soil around the rosebush and sat back on her heels. The morning light was soft and gold, the kind that made everything look like it was waking up. She thought about room 415, the empty windowsill, the visitor's chair pushed into the corner. The man with the winter sky eyes who had said there's no one like it was the most ordinary sentence in the world. She thought about the choice she'd made, not once, but every single day after. The choice to stay, the choice to see him, the choice to love someone the world said she shouldn't. And she thought about what her grandmother used to say. The people who leave don't define you. The people who stay do. Simone smiled. She stayed. If this story moved you, if you felt something in that room, in that silence, in that choice, then you already know the truth. And love doesn't always come when it makes sense. Sometimes it comes when you walk into the wrong room. And the bravest thing you can ever do is stay. Share this story. Someone out there needs to hear it.